Record this. All right, and looks like we're ready to go. We have about over 50 people in the room, so it should be fun. Deborah, I will let you introduce yourself, other than say that we've been friends for, I don't know, several years now. Deborah showed up at our board meeting for the AIA, just nobody knew her. She walked in and we said, okay, you're our next president, and she was.
And I was like, great, let's do it.
So I'll hand it over to you, Deborah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Bo, and thanks, Ken. Thanks for hosting me and this conversation. Ken mentioned we've done this before, but it was a bit of a different presentation. Maybe about a year ago, it was more of a design presentation. I'm not going to dig so much into the design of this project in this one, but we can do that in another time. And we've done lots of tours and likely we'll do them again. I want to do a special call out here. The owner of the house is on this call right now. He's waving his hand, Duncan Cohen. And after I give my presentation, I'm going to ask him just to say a few words from the owner's perspective of what kind of lessons perhaps he's learned in the process, what he can kind of discuss from that perspective. I'm going to do a little bit of a necessary overview that AIA requires. This lovely photograph of me. This is the presentation you're here for. Lessons learned following the path of Passive House. And I'm not going through what the different lessons are that we're learning. You would have gotten that if you are an AIA member, you would have gotten that through your registration. But in order to receive credit, you have to email Pam at AIA Potomac Valley, and you have to put this information in that email, and you have to attend the entire session. I don't know who's counting that, but I'm saying that you have to attend. Bo, just quickly, you are recording. Is this recording going to be available? Will people be able to access it?
Yes, it'll be, what, Ken, a week or two? Or it's posted. We have to edit it and then.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
All
also,
right, so
if you have Ken's email and you want to email him, he can give you a link for the AIA credit as well.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. I have a presentation prepared. I will talk for, I don't know, half hour, 35 minutes, half hour. I'm going to try to just talk all the way through, although I might see if somebody has an answer to a question or two, but then I think we'll reserve questions and answers to the end. You can put them in chat the whole time if you want to. But between that, we'll also then go to Duncan on lessons learned. Okay, hold on. Let me just figure out how to make this thing full screen. Does anyone, wait here. Full screen mode. Okay. All right. So to kind of anchor in the conversation, I run a practice called Cedar. We're very focused on sustainability within our practice. We're mainly single family residential. We do a little bit of other work, but very fundamentally, we are looking to design and build projects that are in harmony with nature, that are in harmony with health and well-being. So we're here to talk about a project that is currently under construction in Delray, Alexandria. It's a single family house. Just to kind of set the framework for this one, some of the fundamental architectural principles that we started out thinking about are, number one, using light to the greatest degree possible as an amazing resource that we all have available to us. Using nature in the same way, how can we harness the power of nature in and outside of the house and around it? And then working with materials in kind of their natural state as much as possible. So those are just some of the overarching architectural principles. There's a lot more to the house than that, but that sort of helped me formulate my ideas around it as we began designing. This is a rendering of the front of the house, the street front. So it's a single family. We have a detached garage off to the right side of the image here. The first floor is a little bit bigger than the second floor, and you see this roof kind of popping out toward the back. That's what we call the north side of the house. And we have that popping out and up so we can get light deep into the back of the house because this is the south facing wall. Then this is the back of the house. So this is that roof you saw popping out. Here around that first floor perimeter roof that wraps around is a planted green roof. So we're utilizing that. to a great degree possible. The back half of the house is facing north. So that gets me into, I'll get into it, but that gets me into one of the first constraints that we had to deal with. I'm going through what I'm calling a series of about 10 lessons learned. So those are the things that I'm really going to focus on. Of course, there were a million lessons learned, and there constantly are, but we'll sort of highlight those to speak of. This is the center part of the house. And then you see up here, kind of difficult to see, that's the pop-up that you saw in that first image. So light is coming through deep through the stairwell all the way into the basement. So we're really trying to harness the power of light through that. Okay. Lesson 1, who is on your team and who are you working with? Who are you bringing to the table, and when are you bringing them to the table? This is something that is oftentimes discussed, I think, in bigger architecture projects, but is never really considered in residential. And I really want to rotate that idea and start to think of it differently. We did not bring everyone to the table at the beginning. We brought them on pretty early. And to me, in particular, the important people to bring on early would be the landscape architects, the MEP engineers, and then the structural engineer. I don't know why that says mechanical, structural, and plumbing. That should say electrical. And then in addition, we had a passive house consultant. So in order to get our passive house status, we've got the consultant who acts not just as the energy modeler, but also the rater. And in fact, we don't have one other consultant on this list who has helped us do all of the blower door tests and kind of just verifying things, what do you call them? The verifier. Anyway, if we brought the passive house consultant on even earlier on the project, that would have had kind of a different impact as we started to think through the fundamental principles of design. So that's sort of the first lesson learned that I want to try to bring into each project from now on. Bring these people on board at the beginning. The second lesson is actually, if you're an architect on this call, you kind of work with this lesson every single time, but it's such an important one that I think it's worth mentioning. The site that you have is the site that you have. And the brief that you're given is the brief you're given. What the client is expecting to achieve is what you are aiming to achieve, and you want to do that for the client. Sometimes those things are not in complete compatibility with passive house, but there are ways, if you kind of focus on those things early and make sure that you address them early, you can sort of figure out the validity of all of it. Two of the things that I can think of on this project where we really had to address that were the clients wanted to have a wood burning fireplace, which now in current passive house regulations is not allowed at all. When we're under 2018, so it was still allowed as long as it had as long as it was completely sealed. So we were able to get it in there. And then the other factor is in the program of the house itself. We have a pretty large house. It's right around 8,000 square feet. It accommodates a pretty large family. And that accounted for a number of the factors that were harder for us to achieve because of the size of the house in order to get the rating. So the site is the site. Here's the site in the dashed red area. This is south facing. This is the road that it's sitting on. It's kind of on this crook of the road, knowing that we need to have the front of the house, the street front kind of have specific programming, knowing that they want to be able to open up to the backyard, and that also have specific programming. This is north side. So we had these contentions already to begin with. Working with your free resources, the sun in particular, and then the winds, and then the greenery, working with these free resources is so important, but sometimes is a bit of a challenge to accomplish. So this is showing how we worked through with the landscape architects the site. We've added a nice front porch. This is a very front porchy neighborhood for those of you who don't know Delray. So we added a front porch to kind of create that neighborhood appeal and to bring the house to the neighborhood. But we also have a really great living space off to the back. So because we have that great living space and because they have this beautiful yard, we wanted to really open up the facade as much as possible to the back. We're opening up the facade to the north. That's already causing some complications in our passive house strategies. So from the beginning, if we had had our passive house consultant on board, they may have pushed us to think those strategies through a little bit more clearly before we took them too far. We're still able to work with it, but just so you know, that caused us some complications. Okay, lesson 3. I think people are on this call from all sort of walks of the passive house life. So I'm just going to do a brief overview. The lesson is passive house. What is passive house? How do you say it? How do you spell it? Does that mean passive solar? What does it include anyway? Okay. Oh yeah, does it have to be a house? No, not to any of that. It is a building of any site, of any kind of type. Passive house is typically thought of very sort of large scale generically in these 5 principles. We have down here on the left, fresh air recovery. So you need to have a balanced air. We have a continuous air barrier that follows all the way around the house. We have continuous insulation also that follows all the way around the house. We have no thermal bridging. Oftentimes we think of that with windows and doors, but there are other factors. And we use high performance windows and doors. Those are the 5 principles that we really need to adhere to in passive house. Those aren't the only principles though that we're thinking about. Okay, so this is the results of one of our early energy models. Some of these values have changed a bit from what you're seeing, but we're still achieving the same kind of metrics. I think what's especially helpful to look at here is that this is a dynamic process. Even in construction, these numbers are being adjusted, not just in design. So it's a constantly being updated thing. They are always checking to make sure, are you following along with the design intent? Does it still meet the same numbers? So what's important to sort of pull out from here is if you see over here, the passive house requirements are heating demand, heating and cooling loads. What has caused us the most difficulty is this cooling load number. This dark black line is the line that you cannot surpass to be able to achieve passive house ratings. Our cooling load has always been really close. And that is a result of mainly the quantity of windows and the direction of windows that we have. I think actually the windows are the biggest factor in our cooling. Oh, and then also just size of the house has had an impact there. You'll notice source energy is 0. And the reason that it's 0 is because we're using renewables for all of the energy gain or energy usage in this house. So source energy is actually sourced from the site rather than from an electric power plant. So we didn't have to worry about that variable at all. And then air tightness is another one I'm going to dig into a bit today. This number right here, 0.7, this is 0.7 air changes per hour. That's what we were targeting at one point. As we began to get deeper and deeper into the design process and notice that we're getting further and further from, or maybe closer and closer to this cooling load limit, we began to dial this number back so that now we are aiming to achieve 0.57. I'm going to leave you hanging to see if we're there or not. Okay, and then this overview is interesting. This green bar, 22,000, this actually now currently is at 25,000 kilowatt hours per year. That's how much the building can produce that's how much electricity the building can produce. This is how much electricity the building is expected to use. So we're going to be producing more than what it can use, even more than what you see here. And that is so that in the future, the owners don't currently have electric vehicles, but that they would be able to then hook up electric vehicles to the house. Some of you guys have seen these diagrams before, but I just think it's an interesting step back, think it through. This is what our building is achieving right now. So this is an updated number at the 25,000. This 2,000 is our space heating number. That's how much electricity it's taking to heat the house. If we built this house to code, this is how much electricity it would take to heat the house, 53,000 kilowatt hours per year. So, I mean, just measure out the difference in those two metrics right there. It's a big house, but it's doing an amazing job. The site EUI, if anyone's familiar with EUIs, we're at 8.76, which is actually a pretty decent number, I think, for a house, for any building, really. Okay, so those are the major metrics that we need to hit, and we're still on target to hit in order to achieve passive house. But something that sort of came out and became very clear is we're not just hitting those metrics. There's a whole number of other things that we need to meet. So lesson 4, it's not just those 5 principles. Number 1, we need to meet all of these different requirements, governmental requirements also. And some of them are not specifically related to the energy efficiency of the house. EPA Indoor Air Plus looks a lot at the air quality of the house. So we're being careful with our filtering. We're being careful with our materiality. It's important to consider that these houses, because they're so airtight, you really want to be careful about what you're putting in them, what their air quality is. I think that's ultimately even coming down to the furniture, because furniture is one of our bigger off-gassing potential products that we bring into our house. So just sort of thinking those things through. Furniture is not actually, part of this conversation, but just thinking those things through. All right, so I'm going to look at each one of these 5 variables and go one by one and tell you and go through these lessons learned in each one of, sort of what we've taken away as we've gone through it. Fresh air recovery. So we know of fresh air recovery as this is balanced air. It means in a passive house, it means you're bringing in an ERV, an energy recovery ventilator, or an HRV, kind of depending on where you're climatically located. But I think it's also really important I'm putting this here because I didn't really know where else to put it, but it's really important to think just large scale. What is your approach to heating and cooling and ventilation? In this house, this is a diagram of the 2nd floor, the ductwork through the 2nd floor. In my mind, what is so impressive about this is the lack of registers that you see and the lack of ductwork, even though we now have 2 different systems of ductwork. We've got heating and cooling supplying this south side of the house and heating and cooling supplying this north side of the house. They're 2 separate systems. And then we also have fresh air supply into the living spaces. This is a bedroom. Oh, sorry, this is the 1st floor diagram. This is a family room and an office. And then we have exhaust coming from bathrooms and closets and mechanical spaces. Those are 2 separate duct systems. So you have a little bit of more coordination to do with the ductwork, but we don't have registers on the windows, which we would typically see. We don't have a large quantity of registers in this whole thing right here is a living room, including the stair. And all we have supplying it are these 2 registers right here. So it's really interesting to kind of consider you just don't have the same quantity of heating and cooling that you would normally have, or that we're used to seeing in a house. Okay, so when they add the ductwork in, you've got to be really careful. Number 1, you've got to be careful to seal off these openings as soon as the ductwork is installed. You don't want to get any air, any contaminants or anything into those ducts. And then when they're applying mastic, a good contractor is going to seal the joints around ducts anyway, but you need to verify it and check it, especially before they put insulation over those ducts. In a passive house, you've got to insulate the ducts. You want to make sure, and then you've got to also test your ducts and make sure that there's leaks in them. So pay attention to timelines. When are you testing the ducts? When are the ducts being insulated? We tested our ducts at the same time as we did our first blower door test. There was already insulation on those ducts. Luckily, we were able to go through and check, and there wasn't too much of a problem. Like there's just a little bit of one here. There wasn't too much of a problem, so we passed that test. But if you're working with a contractor who's not keen on that or is not really paying attention to it, that could cause you big problems and a lot of going back and fixing. Okay, next topic of conversation, the air barrier. Okay, period. There's a lot to talk about with air barriers. So first thing, air barriers. Where do you put the air barrier? This was not something that we debated heavily, but when you look at conversations around air barriers, especially in building science groups, it's always, you know, do you put it on the inside? Do you put it on the outside? And I think traditionally we're really used to seeing air barriers being the gypsum board on the inside of a building. But think about how many problems there are with that. All of the penetrations you make through it, the air barrier is a huge component and it really matters. So for us, we automatically use the outside sheathing, and I think we're going towards this in general as a rule of thumb and as a good practice, building practice. The zip sheathing here is the barrier. So in knowing that, now you're really careful. How is this zip tape installed? Zip has its own manufacturer's requirements. Know the manufacturer's requirements and make sure that they are being adhered to. They have special rollers for you to get this zip tape on with. Pay attention to when this zip system, when the sheathing is put on, pay attention to how hard the nails have been driven through the sheathing. Was the contractor, stressed out that day, or did they have too much pressure in their air gun? If it's driven too hard, you could have air problems. So you would need to then come back and seal holes throughout that sheathing. We didn't have that problem here. These guys are really good builders. But so that's the first defense, right? In getting this up and making sure that your openings are well attended to, and then getting windows in. And then once you have that sheathing system in place, then you can go and do a blower door test. Okay, so blower door test. When you do it matters, and we actually, I think, had a little bit of a hard time figuring out when was the best time to do it. We had already started cladding the exterior with its final materials, but we didn't have our skylights in yet, for instance. So they just had plastic over the skylight openings when we did our first blower door test. Okay, question. How many people does it take to do a blower door test? Apparently this many. We were all there. We were all really excited. We wanted to see it go. We thought that the progress of the build was going really well. We're impressed with the contractors. They're doing an awesome job. They are quality craftsmen. We all got there kind of excited. This is Chris Conway. Many of you probably know him. He's performing our blower door test for us. Within just a couple of minutes, we realized blower door test was a spectacular failure. In fact, he didn't even give us a number because it just really, I don't think we even met code minimum. In Virginia, code minimum for now blower door tests are required, right? So we're getting somewhere with code. Virginia's requirements are 5 air changes per hour at 50 pascals of pressure. Maryland is 3, but Virginia is 5. I don't think we even achieved that. What we're aiming to achieve, if you recall from that early on slide, is 0.57 air changes per hour, not 5, but 0.57. So that was a disappointing day for all of us, although you can see we all smiled happily at the end. Okay, so that's the first blower door test. Pay attention to that blower door. Now take a look at this one. This one is different color. That signifies that it's a different fan. Look at the fan here versus the fan here. We had higher hopes with this one, thinking that this smaller fan would accommodate the project. We had less confidence the second round, so we used a different blower. Well, Chris used a different blower door test. So second time around, the contractors went through after that blower door test. We got the skylights in. The major factors that we saw were window leakage. I learned in that process something very interesting, which now I just go from building to building. I'm like, ooh, they have an air leak. Ooh, they have an air leak. If you see cobwebs or spider webs in windows or in framing or anywhere, it signifies air movement. Apparently, as Chris told us, spiders like to build their webs where there is moving air. Kind of makes sense. The bugs would follow along with that. We found cobwebs in a lot of places, especially in the windows around this house, especially in the basement windows. So that was a really interesting moment. We also found a lot of questionable areas where, you know, there's kind of a parapet wall around that green roof that just needed to be sealed. So the contractors went through, sealed everything as best they could. A big lesson that we learned through this is they used spray foam to seal all of these areas. Spray foam is not an excellent air sealer. I would not recommend it as a source for air sealing. It is a good insulator, and it's a good sort of stopgap measure, but it's not an excellent air sealer. And over time, I think it's shown to fail and to kind of detach from its boundaries. So just kind of keeping that in mind. We got this in the second blower door test. We got much better. We were at 1.36 air changes per hour. We're still 0.54. We're still trying to achieve 0.54. So we still failed. Okay, now after this second blower door test, we're like, okay, what are we going to do? I think what we're going to have to do is bring in aero barrier. So if you're not familiar with aero barrier, it's kind of this glue-like substance that is sprayed into the house. And I think if I can, I'm just going to quickly show you a video of it. It's sprayed into the house. So sort of the opposite of the blower door test, the house becomes positively pressurized, and they're spraying all of this in, and that's finding all of the gaps around the house, and it's going and creating sort of a film around it. So when we started this aero barrier process, we were at 0.12 air changes. So it's already come down even a little bit more from the last blower door test. And it's they like to measure this. It's helpful as a graphic, I think. We were at 152 square inches, like as if all of the pinholes around the house were in one spot. It's about, you know, a box that size. That's how much of an opening you have outside. After the aero barrier, we were at 0.22 air changes per hour. So that was a really exciting day. We sat there for about a half a day and just watched this graph slowly going down and down and down and down. This point right here, notice it went down dramatically. This point right here, we all walked around the house and just took a leaf to any penetrations that we saw to see if there was air movement, or our hands to feel if there was air movement, found every single penetration that we felt anything and sealed them right away. And then it went down dramatically from there. Okay, really quickly, I want to just show you, because I think this is really interesting. So here's an example. Look at how much air movement is coming out of that gap. So we thought we had found all the penetrations. These guys weren't shirking on their job. They just didn't realize that they hadn't found the penetrations. This is a video of the aero barrier process. So you can kind of see, it's a little terrifying, honestly, but it cleaned up really well. All right, segue, but let's get back. Okay, so we're at 0.22. I actually haven't seen the energy model since we did this to see how much that's impacted us, but I think it's probably really improved things quite a bit. All right, moving on, continuous insulation, lesson 7, insulation compensation. When in doubt, insulate. We had a really big surface area of the house, so we had to kind of almost overly insulate the whole thing. So I'm not gonna read all of this right now, but we have 6 inches below the slab of insulation. We have 4 inches on the perimeter. I can show you in the building diagram. We have 4 inches exterior insulation along the perimeter, 6 inches exterior along the roof. So that is our continuous insulation barrier. Inside of that, we have double stud walls, which are fully insulated. We fully insulated the roof rafters. We actually fully insulated the interior also, but that's for soundproofing. And then, so here's some photos of the insulation going up along the foundation. So here we're using rock wool comfort board on the foundation. We used it consistently all the way up the siding. So we had also kind of a consistent side. We're paying attention to how the drain board is being attached outside of the comfort board, because even these moments where you have holes penetrating insulation, or where you have holes penetrating into the sheathing above, you want to be really careful about from the air barrier perspective. here for a very long time. I think the owners were calling this a fuzzy blue, brown blanket. Duncan, you can tell me if that's right. I think Ainsley was calling it that. It looked like this for a long time, you know, getting all of this insulation up. It's 2 layers of 2-inch staggered. Okay, another really big lesson learned was interior insulation. Before we, so we passed the blower door. Well, yeah, we passed aero barrier, which was a version of a blower door. So we feel pretty confident about that. We thought, okay, now we can finally insulate on the interior and close in the walls, which is a really exciting moment. Now we've actually got interior walls. Insulation, installation, those 2 words have been said a lot, and it's really important and it's really difficult to achieve, especially if you're not keyed into it as a contractor. So here's a picture just of our double stud walls before we've insulated on the interior. This was early on insulation. So, I mean, it's so obvious. You come in and you see something like this and you're like, oh, come on, guys, you can do better than that, right? And they're like, well, we had to do this quickly because we're doing this and this, and we just needed to get the sequencing right. We're not going to do it like that on all of it. No, you've got to redo this. We're looking for grade 1 insulation. So for those who aren't familiar, installation comes in different grades. There's grades 1 through 3. And grade 1 means that it is really very perfectly fitted into the cavity. You have no gap, virtually no gaps between the framing and the insulation. You are not shoving it in. You are making it really be a very tight fitted blanket in there. Our contractor, the subcontractors were not keen on that process. Additionally, in the basement, they began insulation with craft-faced paper insulation. So that's problematic because that craft face becomes vapor barrier. We want no vapor barriers inside the house. Because we have the exterior insulation on this house, our dew point is not as big of a problem. We're not really worried about moisture from outside hitting or inside. Either way, we're not really worried about moisture hitting the sheathing. If it hits from inside, it can dry to the inside. But we are worried about moisture from inside getting trapped in the cavities. So we did everything we could to avoid craft face in those walls. So it's kind of hard to see, but this is one of the first passes. We used fiberglass in the exterior walls on the inside. This is one of the first passes. It looks pretty clean, but over here you can sort of see where it's tightly fitted in. It's starting to fold in on itself. Insulation, many of you know this, if you start to compress it, it really loses its capacity. It just won't work as well. So they needed to go through and redo this. The subcontractors redid it twice, and it was still unsatisfactory, so that the contractors, the general contractors, went through and fixed it all themselves. We eventually passed, but it took 3 times to redo insulation. I was thinking a good lesson learned there is, I thought an idea would be to have a mock-up of a framed wall with a piece of insulation in it, bring that mock-up in, have a meeting with the insulation installers and say it needs to look like this, and leave it there for them to always be able to refer to. Maybe you guys have other ideas on how to do that. Okay, next topic, no thermal bridging. So thermal bridging in terms of windows and doors, we're pretty familiar with, I think, you know, and windows and doors are really well crafted these days. So they've really eliminated the thermal bridge problem, but that's not the only place thermal bridging happens. I had a conversation with our passive house consultant, Peabody Fine. Izumi was who we worked with closely on this. I had a conversation with her about what some of her lessons learned were, and she told me steel really made her life hard. So I owe her a gift. So here, see, we do have quite a bit of steel in this house, and then we also have it on the outside of this house right here, right? You all see that? You're all like, ooh, what the heck is happening there? That's a really big piece of steel that runs the entire length of the house from inside to outside. Yeah, thermal bridging, right? We had to fully encase this thing in insulation. Why is this here? What you can't see below here is that this is a corner window. So there's no way to support the corner of this building. What you can't see above this is that brick wraps this corner above that corner window. So we needed a way to support that brick. We couldn't get around it, but that is something that probably had we had Izumi on board from the very beginning, we would have rethought that detail because of its thermal problems. You see these, I think for a while affectionately called them shark's teeth. They're kind of like the braces of the house. These are steel fins that support the roof overhang. The roof overhang is 4 feet long. And rather than having something that penetrates the interior framing and then comes out to support that overhang, we thought, oh, let's hang these off of the outside of the roof, and that would be a much cleaner detail. But it's really a nice detail in the end, but what it ended up doing is creating penetrations at each one of these bolts that go from inside to outside. And then also we needed blocking on the inside. So all of this is not an insulated space. So we had thermal bridging issues up in this area. All of this had to be analyzed in the model in order to make sure that it wasn't having a negative impact. We're good, but just so you're aware of that. The steel that we have running across the length of the building goes all the way to the sheathing. That if steel is running to the sheathing, there's nothing between it and the sheathing to stop that flow of heat. So that required its own therm calculations. And then this isn't steel, but above here we have solid wood above we have large scale doors in here. So above those doors is just like a solid mass of wood. There's no place for insulation in there. So the reason that these things actually are problems or potential problems is not so much about insulation as it is about dew point and making sure that we really are not allowing moisture to capture in that area and not be able to drain back out. In a super insulated house, you just really don't want to have any potential areas for moisture to sit. All right, and then the final topic is high performance windows and doors. So, I mean, I think we know you want to use triple pane windows. We worked primarily with Lowen, which is a high-end window company. They make really beautiful windows and they make very quality windows. So they are not passive house, I don't know what you call certified or registered, but we thought, well, that's okay. They can handle it. They're very high quality. I think that there's a little give and take there. They are very high quality, but they need to understand what the purpose is. So Lowen created this curtain wall. This curtain wall is on one side of it. This is a 3-story curtain wall. Once that unit is in, it's a single unit. So we're really good there. This window though, here, we had to meet with the window manufacturer multiple times and fabricator and even the glass fabricator to make sure that we could get the values that we needed to achieve on these windows, because this is west facing wall. So there's going to be window shades in there. But we ended up making the solar heat gain coefficient of just these curtain wall windows slightly different than the majority of the windows through the house in order to kick back our cooling load problem a bit. But so here, this is a detailed picture of a sash in a window frame. This was taken during the aero barrier process. This white stuff that you see right here is the aero barrier coming through. So the reason that's coming through is because this sash is not seated properly in the window frame itself. And that's why I mention the window installer needs to really be keyed into the point of this exercise. An air barrier that's tightly wound around the building does no good if your windows are letting air come through. So all of the windows had to be adjusted. These doors are by a manufacturer that's very well acquainted with passive house, so we didn't encounter the same kind of issues with it. Okay, so final lesson. Out of all of that, intent is everything. We have a team that all went into this. Interestingly, I didn't make this a lesson, and maybe I should have. We had a really hard time finding a builder who was familiar with passive house building, but we did find a builder who was keen to learn and who wanted to be a part of the process. and was willing to learn through it. So I say generosity of spirit because we all have had to come to the table and expand ourselves a bit and be willing to eat our mistakes a bit and try something a new way in order to make it work and in order to make it happen. I would say that's true even most of the owner of anything, but also the builder. The builder has been very willing to go back and fix the things that that were harming us in getting our passive house certification. So that part has been really great. Intent is everything, meaning make sure your team is aware of why you're doing it, what they're doing, what the ultimate outcome is, and how to achieve it. If they're on board with that, then I think you'll go a lot farther than just saying this is going to be a passive house. Okay, so that's my whole spiel. We have about 15 minutes, I think, for questions and answers. How do you want to do it, Ken and Bo? Should I just read them off, or?
Yeah, why don't you read those?
Sorry, let me really quickly invite Duncan to give.
Yes, I want to hear from Duncan.
Hey everyone, if my expression doesn't show it, this is one of the most exciting projects of my entire life. I absolutely love this. Deborah has been amazing, and I feel so fortunate to be able to build a house of my wife's and my dreams. A lot of the genesis of this started with my father as a kid taking me on the DC Solar Homes Tour, when people would just geek out and open up their homes and show what they had done, whether it's just a small addition and how they had done some sort of environmental upgrade to their house. But really, those planted the seeds for me to get into this building design and building technology type of being an aficionado of that. A couple things I just wanted to rattle off. We did focus, it was important to us to have the building conform to universal design principles as much as possible, with the idea that we age in place in this location. There are some things that are sort of no-brainers to expand your door sizes, your rough openings to 36 inches, because the price between a 36-inch versus a 34 or 32-inch door is minimal, and trying to eliminate thresholds whenever possible, dealing with stonescaping and landscaping to soften your edges. For heaven forbid, I as an 80-year-old or my toddler falls, it's much better to fall into a soft edge versus a hard edge. Those kind of things, that was important to us, and Deborah was great at accommodating that. It was very important for us to do indoor-outdoor design as much as possible, always working around the DC humidity and inclement weather that we have here. That's really hard to do as compared to Arizona or California, where you just throw open the doors and throw open the windows with zero humidity. You can be indoor-outdoor very easily. But as Deborah showed you, the overhangs, not only are those a beautiful architectural detail, but they do serve a purpose where it hides from the rain and the sun. It allows for us to be outdoors much more than we would otherwise be. Another element that we looked at is the window designs. As opposed to doing your standard casement, we did awning windows in many cases. So if there is rain, you open up the house. As we all know, the DC area, you can have nice weather for a couple hours, and then all of a sudden rain comes in or the humidity becomes unbearable. But at least if you have the sort of awning window, you're safeguarded against the rain more so than you would be with a standard awning opening. That was important. Also, this was a luxury, but for me, very important, where we went with Lowen, partially because they have retractable screens, because so often you're, 90% of the time you're looking through screens and obscuring your indoor-outdoor aesthetic. Really, for once in a while, you're going to use that screen. But so all of our windows are screenless. That was something very important to me. And the price point was actually quite minimal for that added benefit. It was about $200 extra per window, which I thought was a good bang for the buck for the lifetime of those very, beautiful windows that we have. That was an element to the outdoor in that we were working on. So the fins and the windows. Another thing, the Peabody consultants, like Deborah talked about, bringing them on was a wonderful thing. My suggestion to anyone doing this in the future is once the main contract of the builder is taken on, that those subcontractors that are under the payment of the owners, such as myself, become absorbed such that the owner is not the middleman between you as architects and the builders to get those kind of things done. Because as Deborah talked about, we had some snafus related to insulation that cost us extra money because I was sort of in between that subcontractor, the PHIUS and the Peabody consultancy, energy modeling consultants. I think that should be absorbed by the builders. We really focused heavily on air quality, like Deborah talked about with the ERV, but my wife and I could not be more different. She runs cold, I run hot. I run sweaty, she runs dry. So not only was that ERV a good environmental thing and air quality thing, but we focused a lot on airflow, and Deborah designed into the stairwell. We'll see how it works, but it's a great, we're excited about it, basically to have the Venturi stacking effect where you have an upflow of air. So not just focusing on humidity, temperature, and air quality in terms of air filtration, but also airflow. That was a huge thing, and some might say I'm ceiling fan obsessed, but that is another thing that we have heavy in this place, where you can control the airflow through ceiling fans, but also through the design that Deborah brought to the table. I think that's a very important design element here. Not even if you're not as extreme as my wife and I in terms of heat and temperature preference, but I don't want to freeze her out if the only issue that's going on is really an airflow thing. So we have more control over that. We looked at landscape. We have spent quite a bit of money on landscape, but I think that from a builder perspective, I'd never really thought about landscape as additional usable square footage. So most people see this as like a secondary thing, but I think the outdoor in concept, we really bought into the idea that your yard is usable square footage if you design it properly. So it's not just a luxury to kind of throw at fancy trees and water fountains and things like that, but rather you're expanding, you're giving your client the ability to have greater square footage as opposed to being contained, even if they have a 2,000 square foot house or an 8,000 square foot house, whatever it is, you're maximizing your yard and looking at it as you're buying more, investing in more square footage of livable space. And then dealing with, I think from a builder's perspective, it's safe to say we were unaware, the builders and we were unaware how the timeline is extended by these extraordinary steps of building. So I have been so pleased with our builder, and it has taken an extraordinarily long time. I think they underestimated the build by about 6 months at least, and we did. And I had no way of, as a client, I had no way of checking that and saying, hey, I think you guys underestimated by 6 months. But all of these details, and they have been amazing at it, take a really long time. It's much more time intensive. Add 6 months to your standard build, or I'm just spitballing, but that is something that you have to bank on, and we're paying double mortgage as we do that. There's financial implications for builders, architects, and clients themselves. I think that's something to look at. And then finally, I think that I try to look at the bang for buck or return on investment. I think as builders or as architects, that would be something that I would appreciate if you came to the table and say, look, you're going triple glazed is adding 25%. It makes sense if you're gonna be there for X amount of time. Or wall assemblies, absolutely, total bang for the buck. Up your insulation, that's a no-brainer. But looking at the different elements that our house has, geothermal, how much you invest in tree sizing. They can do tree size modeling in terms of the shading that you have. Do you add another $1,000 per tree to get a bigger tree to get greater shading, or do you put low-E glass on that addition that you're doing? But understanding the bang for buck, so that as a client, you guys can come and say, hey, this is a no-brainer bang for buck. and this is more of a luxury item, or it only makes sense if you're here for you're going to age in place and you're here for 25 plus years, then go for it. It's a no-brainer. But if you're here for a 5-year contract in the DC area, you may not get it back. I think that's what I got.
Wow.
Thanks,
Wow. Well, I'm going to give an applause right now
Duncan.
for both of you. My gosh, it's a lot. So I think we next time need to schedule a little longer. Deborah, there's a couple of questions in there about air sealing. For instance, I have posted in the chat, if people want to look, there's some links to Deborah's website so you can find out more about her awesome team and client. And also, the Passive House Accelerator is a great source of information. They have tons of video, they have tons of articles, really great organization, and I put that in there. Also, 475 High Performance Building Supply, great source of some additional air sealing details and where you can get the stuff. I also put in there a link to our registration, which is a monthly Zoom, lunchtime Zoom. We're the second Wednesday every month, although we may change that, but the link will allow us to reach out to you. And we are looking in 2024 to have a list of speakers lined up that you all can then schedule in if you have any ideas on who that might be. It doesn't have to be geocentric to the capital region, but certainly reach out to us and let us know what you might be interested in. So we have a few questions. Do you want to address those, Deborah? I know energy analysis software was one, and what are some non-negotiable must-dos, and also about wood versus steel. And I just addressed, I think, the sealant question.
Okay, I only see 2, so maybe I'm missing it, but I see the wooden I-joist question. It wasn't an option because of the spans and the loads that we were carrying where the steel is happening. But I think probably knowing now the impact that it had, not just, steel is obviously more expensive. So not just to that, but but actually had to our thermal analysis and the overall energy efficiency of the house, I'd probably I'd look at the design a little bit differently next time for that. Jay, you're asking for starting off on Passive House, what are some non-negotiable must-dos? Maybe some other people here also might have some input on that, but I think getting an energy model done like as soon as possible, even if it's kind of rudimentary. And, our software is starting to allow us to do this ourselves. So I'm still learning how to do it in my own office, but I feel like doing that as you're designing is probably the best thing that you can do that'll go the longest way. Non-negotiable must-dos on a good build, if you're like, I want to do an energy efficient build, but I don't think I can afford doing what you've done here, is, I think Duncan kind of touched on this, is focusing on the perimeter, making sure the continuous exterior insulation is, in my opinion, a non-negotiable. I don't know why we don't just automatically do that. Building codes are going in that direction anyway, so let's get ahead of that curve. And high performance windows and doors, and paying attention to your corner details and where things transition. Just really knowing those things up front are really important. I'm not sure about any other questions, Bo. Did I miss any?
Well, you mentioned that what software did you use?
Well, we used Woofy modeling.
Okay, all right. So there's a couple of models out there that you can look up. Certainly Passive House Accelerator, and there's sources out there. We have about 1 minute left. I have a question, Deborah and Duncan. So lessons learned, now that you're here, going all the way back to the start, would you do it again?
Would you, Duncan?
I would definitely do it again. It is a little bit of the boiling the frog alive in terms of some of these costs, and even some of the like Peabody and some of the energy modeling things and that Deborah talks about. For me, for someone who's never considered, okay, or even the aero barrier, which is, you know, $1.15 to $1.50 per square foot, which came to about $10,000 or for us. Some of those numbers are just shocking to me, even if they're totally worth it. But it's totally worth it. Yes, in my case, it has been. And also my wife and I are here. We're locals. We're here to stay. And it's our final house. So over a 40-year expanse of time, it's a no-brainer to do these things. But I think from your professional perspective, if you could figure out how to sell those different expenses in a way that's palatable to someone who's doing it for the first time, because hearing, okay, $10,000 for passive house certification, for me, it'd be worth it even if we didn't hit certification, because of all the checks and balances, made it worth it, made us up our game, our construction game. You know, we built a better house, whether we hit passive house or not. So that was $10,000 well spent. But I think it's how you as builders and architects can help translate and beat those costs and say, this is worth it, this is not worth it. But for us, it has been totally worth it. Yes.
Yeah, Duncan, on our next one, it'll be so much better.
Your next forever house. Listen, thank you everybody for taking your lunchtime to share with us. We will be back in a month. I hope everybody has a good holiday season, and so we will have the recording posted. Please spread the word, and thanks again for joining.
And I see just another question on there. Can I answer it really quickly that Al Cox had?
Sure, about expense.
I know that Ken needs to head out, and maybe other people do too, but just to not ignore you, the extra cost, we did not evaluate the cost between doing code build versus passive house build. We weren't ever in the market of doing code build, I don't think, so that was not really an option, but it would be a really interesting cost comparison between the two.
Yeah, I think in general, I did and say to Al that cost is always something that comes up. It turns out it is really not that much more expensive, especially if you start at passive house as the beginning. And also codes are moving in the direction of high performance building. So it all sort of pencils out in the end. So once again, any other burning questions anybody want to ask?
The only other thing is to get credit again for AIA, you have to email Pam. I just put it in the chat. You have to email Pam at aiapv.org, include your name, include your AIA number, and if you want a certificate.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it, Duncan. Thank you, Deborah. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Bo, for having us.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.